Hello, my name is Jack Keefe, and I'm the children's pastor at Christ United Methodist Church in Mobile, Alabama. Welcome to the Pajama Conference. Great concept, and I'm honored to play a small role in it. I hope that what we're getting ready to share and discuss with you will help you in your ministry. Part of what I'm going to be doing is talking about the concept. The topic is in or out of your box. Are you standing in it or on it? And what I mean by that is that for many folks, a box is your ministry, if I can use that visualization. And so you're standing in a box, and you look at the sides of your box, and it kind of determines your ministry, what you're going to be able to do, and your vision for it. But if you get on a stepladder and look over the walls, there's a lot more that can be done. So we're going to look at those walls. What is it that either limits your vision or keeps you doing the same thing you've always done? And because the old saying is, you do the same thing the same way, you get the same results. And so we're going to look at some things. So we're going to use the visualization of a house. A lot of people, when they go to a house, it's like buying a new house. Very few of us are in a position where we start in a church a new ministry when the church is starting, because let's face it, they got to get some folks in it in order to afford a children's pastor. Now, some of your volunteers, you may be in that situation, and it's a great situation. You walk into the house, you look around, and you've had the opportunity to kind of set some things in place so that when you walk in, it's new, it's fresh. But for most of us, we're renovating. We're going to a house that already has some walls up and a roof over our head, and these are the things that we need to talk about. What is it that limits us? What is it that gets us in a position where we think that we cannot do anything other than we've been doing before? And the things I'm going to share are not anything that's new, spectacular. You're not going to go away from saying, oh man. What you are going to go away from is saying, those things are so close to us that we forget about them. We forget to bring them into the thing of looking at what it is. So we're going to renovate a house, and we're going to look at our ministry in that way. We're going to stand on top of the house, and we're going to explore all the things of it. We're going to crawl into the crannies and nooks of it to see what it is that we can do. Because here's the bottom line. If you don't explore and look at the potential and possibilities, you're going to keep doing the things the same way. And a lot of folks get frustrated in ministry, and they drop out. Volunteers drop out because there's nothing new going on. It's kind of like I went into a church that I'd grown up in many years ago, and the same walls were there, but also the pictures on the walls had not changed. And this was in a children's area, and for 35 years plus, nothing had been done in those rooms to freshen them up. And actually the tables were in the same exact space, same exact spot. And it made me think of the fact that, man, it was probably pretty boring then. It's probably been boring ever since. And so we want to look at some of the things that limit us. Now, some of those limitations we cannot change. If I go into a home, and the reason I'm sharing this visualization is that my wife likes to buy old houses. And by old, I mean we have to renovate them. When she walks into a house, I look at it and say, oh, we need to freshen up the paint. She walks in it and she goes, we're going to take that wall down. We're going to put the stairs over here instead of over there. And it's like we're gutting and redoing. And not every ministry you go into, not every position you go into, do you need that radical of a change. But there's always things to do, because you have to think about what's holding up those walls. And so one of the things that we're going to do is look at these. One of the primary things that gets our focus is finances. Ministry costs money, and finances determine what you're going to be able to do. Now, one of the ways I would encourage you to look at it is that we take the money that the church is giving you in your budget, and you look at it and you say, what's it for? And you reallocate. You keep track of what you did the year before, what you're hoping to do this coming year, and you keep moving those monies around on line items, at least for yourself, so it helps you plan what it is that you need to do. But that's staying in your walls. That's standing in your box. To stand outside of your box means you try to creatively come up with some ways to do things that you couldn't do if you just did it the same old way. In many churches, you have some great opportunities for fundraising. That's kind of almost natural and built in. Remember, there was a church I was served at in First Methodist of Alberton, and they had a tradition of this massive chicken barbecues. And people in the community knew about it, and all you had to do was announce it. And they would line up in the parking lots to take those things with them, and we'd make great money. Another church I served at in Mount Dora, Florida, there was an art show every year, and our church just happened to be the church downtown with all the parking. We made thousands of dollars for our youth program just sitting on a bus with the radios, with people letting people in and out of our parking lot, and all we had to do was make sure that on Sunday morning our church folks had a place to park. There's also, where I'm at right now at Christ United Methodist Church, the ability to sell pumpkins. Pumpkins go like hotcakes here, and we sell them for a month. At the end of the month, we are so tired of pumpkins, but I make a third of my budget again in that fundraiser. And so no matter what size church you are or you serve in, there's always opportunities, but you have to take a different mindset. You have to take the mindset of what's out there, what can I do? I know some folks do a lot of barbecue, and they sell, like here, our teenagers sell Boston butts, and they'll sell 300 of those things. And so, but even if you're a small church, there are things that you can do. And that supplements your budget that you can use for it. It also creatively allows you to do more. And that's really what this is about, is that if you stand in your box and you accept the walls that are there and you never try to do anything different, a lot of you are going to get frustrated because your ministry is limited to that. And what I want to encourage you to do is think about doing ministry above and beyond. Look at what's out there for you to do, and at the same time, pray and ask for guidance on what God would have you to do. What will He give you a vision for that you can do that's different? How can you creatively come up with money? I know for years, in terms of doing creative ministry, one of the neatest things that I had ever done was an Adopt a Puppet program that came out of One Way Street. They used to have a full packet of how to do this. And in a church where I had a very active puppet ministry, we would have groups and individuals buy puppets for us, name them, and then we'd add them to our puppets. And so there are always many different ways to creatively finance your program that allows you to do more ministry than you currently are. So are you in that box? Or do you look around and see what it is that you're able to do and then look at it and say, okay, what else is there? That's stepping out of the box. The next thing would be facility. And behind finances, facility is probably one of the #1 issues that allows you to do more ministry or limits the ministry you can. Now, you have to walk through your facility and find out what is it and where is it that I can use. Where is the children's area? And how can I use it maybe in a different way? How can I do shared space and do a trade-in, trade-off? We have, no matter what church you have or you're in, you always could use more space. At least that's been my issue, is I'm always asking for more space. And so we have to make sure that the space we're using, we're being the best stewards of. And we're doing it to the best that we can. I had an issue whenever I came to Christ Methodist in terms of Vacation Bible School. We had just reached our maximum. We could not have another child in VBS. And it was like, wait a minute, we got to do something. And so instead of looking at the facility as something that limited us, we looked at our facility and said, okay, how can we do things differently? So actually our solution was, in order to use all of our facility in the best manner possible, we run 3 VBSs concurrently. Now that may sound kind of strange, but we broke it out into areas, and we had one area that we could put all the children in at one time. And so we do our opening and closing there. And then we break out into different age levels, and those have different buildings, they have different areas, they all do the same thing, but they do it like running 3 separate VBSs at one time. Did we have some issues to work out? Oh yes. But it allowed us to now not have a top of 800 kids, but we can go beyond that. Now that may seem a lot of kids, but you probably have the same issue in your church as far as facility. I know in other churches I've been at, we're limited to the biggest space. That's where we pull all the children in. But are there different ways to use that space? And that's really what I'm sharing with you. Are you standing in the box? Or you get on top of it to get a different viewpoint, to get a different way of looking at things, using the same facility, using the same financials that you have, but using them in a different manner so that you can get more ministry done. Facility, all of us use shared space. If you have an area that is for your children's ministry only, you are so fortunate. Almost all of my space is shared space, and throughout the years has been shared space. And we got to get very creative in terms of that. We go into a hall and put stuff up and put stuff down. I used to think, well, you know, I can't do anything in this room because it's shared. And then as I started looking at what startup churches were doing and pulling in 18-wheelers into a high school and unloading it and putting stuff in and then loading it back up. And you know, I was at a church in Largo, Florida, at Nona United Methodist Church, and I remember in our shared space that our preschool broke down every Friday all their stuff, packed it up, put it away, and then we had Sunday where we broke out stuff and put it up, and then took it down, and then they put their stuff back up on Monday morning. Now, it is a lot of work, but look at your space through a different set of eyes. God's eyes. How can you make it more inviting for the children? And yes, it may require some work, but don't let that limit you and put you in a box. Step out of the box. Look at your issue from a different perspective and see how you might be able to do things differently. Let God guide you. He's got the answers. Now, one of the issues that I'm always asked about is volunteers. Do you ever have enough volunteers? My answer is no, because we can always use volunteers to do something, another ministry, something we haven't thought about. So we're always looking for volunteers to help us out. Are volunteers hard to get? Well, that depends. One of the things I would encourage you to look at in volunteers is not so much filling a space or filling a gap, but looking for volunteers to meet the needs in your ministry. You know, I tell folks that I can help you understand doing with children. It's not rocket science. All it requires is a love of children. If you love children, you'll make a great volunteer. The other stuff we'll give you, we'll resource you. But you got to have folks that love being around children. And that's an ongoing process. Now, does that limit you? Sure. If you don't have enough volunteers, at some point you're going to be faced with, I got more kids than I have volunteers. What do we do? And that's a struggle, because within our Methodist Church Safe Sanctuary policy, you know, there's a sense of we're only supposed to have so many kids with adults. And if you get to the point where you got more kids and not enough adults, what do? Turn them away? it's time to get creative. It's time to look at the box, see what our guidelines are that we have to abide by, and come up with some other stuff. Now, one of the things that I've done is gone to large group. We have enough children here that we have a preschool worship at 9:15 and an elementary worship at 10:40. And do we have all the children in the church coming? Nah. Some of them want to go to the regular worship services, but we have enough that we have a fairly large group at both times in their own worship. And so we get volunteers that will just be those extra hands, and we'll do music and help with the actually a lot of the things. I call my 4th and 5th graders elders, and we teach them how to run tech, and we let them do the tech, and we give them ownership in what's going on. We have a lot of different things that we do. We have a news crew where we're trying to get going to work on communication. I find that one of the best ways to get volunteers is to communicate not what our needs are, but the stories of what our ministry is doing and how it is impacting children and their families. I found that people, when asked to serve, will step up. If they're not asked, they're not going to answer the call. And that asking is one-on-one. It's based upon relationships. Most of our volunteers come from volunteers talking and spreading the word through their friends. And so volunteers, yeah, it's an issue, but do you stay in your box and just say, oh, there's never enough volunteers, this is all we can do? Or do you stand up on top of that box and you look at different ways? We're getting ready to run a volunteer campaign right now in about 2 weeks. And it's themed out Be the One. And it's based upon the fact that every one of us has had in our life someone that impacted us for Christ in our early years. They were the one. They made a difference. I can remember Carl Lurch at Woodstock Park United Methodist Church. He was the one in my life. Now I had others, come through. I had Roy Ben Ridley whenever I was in high school that helped and mentored me. And I had Dr. Jim Hamilton when I was in college who mentored and helped me along, and Dr. Hunter. I mean, we all have names. But to a large part, whenever we were growing up, there was that one person when we were a child that made the difference in our life. And our challenge to our folks here is, you remember the one? Then be the one. And so look at how you can interact and bring more volunteers in, and in different ways. It's not just about teaching Sunday school classes. And so there are a lot of different ways, and anything that you can get someone to do, it frees you up to do more ministry. I need time with the children. I want to be their pastor. And so I want to be able to have that relationship with the children. And so I want someone that's helping with publicity and running meetings and doing things like this. And so find people that have a talent and ask them if they'll use it for the Lord in the church. I'm sure they're already using it for the Lord out in the world, but we also need it in the church. So volunteers are a big thing. So look at your volunteer needs. Stand in the box or step out. How can you do things differently? That's really what this is all about. How can you take a different attitude and look at doing it differently than you are now? Staffing is also an issue. And, I'm really speaking now to churches that, and children's pastors and folks that are part of a church staff where it's more than just you. And at the same time, I'm also talking about where you may be the only one and you're working on your volunteer base. And I mean, a core children's team where your volunteers, we're not talking about volunteers that work in the classroom, but that work with you in the office doing things. My philosophy is, I've got some strengths, I got lots of weaknesses. Wherever I'm weak, I hire someone that's a whole lot better than I am. And then I let them go. I let them loose to do ministry. And that's not saying that there's not oversight, but the worst thing in the world you can do is hire somebody or get a volunteer and then micromanage them. Now, you want to see the end result to make sure that it goes in with your vision. But too often we try to play the Lone Ranger on it. And it's kind of like, how many hours can you spend doing it? And one of the things that happens then is that your family suffers. And I've seen too much of that over the years, and it doesn't have to be. If you're in children's ministry, you're passionate about what it is that you're doing and your love for kids. And so you put in the hours. As a volunteer, you're putting in the hours. As staff, you're putting in the hours. It's not a job. It's much more. You love these kids and you want them to know Jesus Christ as Savior. And so you're going to be there for them. There has to be a balance, because if your family suffers, that's just not right. And so what you want to do is get a core group of volunteers to start off with that has the abilities to do what you're not good at. You know, I'm not, when I write, nothing goes out from my office without it being reviewed and the verbiage changed by one of my staff, because I can't write. I've known that for years. Ask any of my professors that I had. I just can't write. I write the way I talk. I ramble. So you see, I'm not the most articulate speaker either. What I'm hoping to share with you today comes from experience. I started working in a church when I was 16 years old. I started getting paid for working in a church. And that's all I've known. And I've been doing it for 40 plus years. And so I have had many opportunities of experiences of ministry and learned from them. I would kind of wish at times I had a videotape of what it was like of me when I first started out, because I know I made a mess many a time. But I was surrounded by people that loved me, accepted me, and helped model and mentor for me so that I could get through it. And so what you want to do is find folks that have the strengths that you don't have, and then encourage them to be free, to listen to God's vision, to cut them loose and let them do ministry. And so if you have volunteers that way, if you have staff, your hires are critical in staff. Now, as a children's pastor at a fairly large church, I do have multiple staff. And because of that, we also do something that you may find kind of strange. And that is that we interview for positions, and then I'll take the top 2 or 3 that I feel strongly about, and then I'll send my current staff out with my credit card to go take this person to lunch and get to know them, and then come back and give me an honest appraisal of not, you know, if they like them or if they can do a job, but will they mesh with us? Because teamwork, the children's ministry team, is so crucial. If we have a team that enjoys working together, is challenged by working together, and enjoys coming to work, then we're going to get so much more accomplished. You know, a bad hire takes about 2 to 3 years to recover from. And so you need to put the time in on the front end to make sure you're getting the person, and it may not be the person that has the most expertise, but the person that fits into your team. One of the things I'm now doing, we're fortunate to have a counselor on our staff, and I'm trying to help our team go to the next level. My core team is about 9 individuals. And so we're all, including me, taking all sorts of psychological tests that will help us understand who we are. And if we understand who we are and how we react and how we do things, then we can understand each other, and things start clicking and making sense. And we have a different way of relating to each other. And I would encourage you, if you're on a multi-staff team, to do that and we're finding it to be very beneficial. But all in all, it's like this. No matter whether you have staff or volunteers, if you stay in your box, you're not going to look outside and try to bring people in that can help you in ways that you're weak. Because, you know, we don't like to admit that we're not good at this or not good at that. And so we want to find folks that are good at it, and then we want to cut them loose to do ministry. Please don't give someone a job and get them involved in ministry and then keep them by a choke chain and, you know, let them do ministry, because then so much more can occur. So your staffing is an issue. Are you standing in the box? Are you standing out of the box? What are the creative ways that you can come up with for getting staff? And they don't have to be paid staff. There are volunteers out there that have never been asked to put their talents to work for the church, and they'd love to be asked, because their talent was given to them by God and is to be used for God's work. And so let's put them to work and let them help, and then cut them loose to do ministry. One of the next boxes that we get into is program. And by that I mean, are we looking at our programs and reevaluating them on a regular basis? Or do we keep doing the same thing because we've always done the same thing? And there are some churches that are in that box. I remember one time, and I will not name the church, but I had interviewed for a church, and they asked me to come on board. And one of the statements they made was that, now, we don't want you to create anything new. We don't want you to change anything that we've got. We are perfectly satisfied with where we're at and what we've got, and we just want you to maintain. Well, we parted our ways. And because I know me, and I'm not a maintainer. I'm the type of person that's always trying to create more work for myself, it seems like. But in your programs, if your programs, you need to evaluate, are your programs growing? And while we don't like to look at numbers and stuff like that, that's not what really it's all about. There are ways to evaluate your programs, and one of them is to look at some numbers, but also one of the things that's important to look at is this. Are your children bringing their friends? To me, that's the most central number there is. If I have the same kids coming all the time, and I don't care what the number size is, we're not really doing what we need to be doing. If our children are bringing their friends, then they're excited about it, and we're doing something right, because you don't invite someone to something that you don't want to show off. And so that's the most important number for me, is are our children inviting their friends to come, and are we growing through that way? And so programs, you know, there's all sorts of ways to do things, and I think after about 2 or 3 years, most programs have run their course, and they start getting bored and boring, and you need to change it up. Don't be scared to change it up. There'll be programs within the church. Not only do they need to be changed up, but things that work in one church and you might listen to and hear about and you try to implement in your church may just not work. And so be flexible and be okay with doing things that are appropriate for your folks, your kids, your church. Don't get caught up in it has to be done this way. There's some great things that are out there, and they're even greater if you adapt them for your usage. And you say, well, I can't do that. I can't adapt curriculum. Well, that's what we're talking about in terms of volunteers. There's probably some folks in your church, 1 or 2 people, that can take something, change the verbiage out, and rewrite it for you. And that's something they can do, and something they feel really good about themselves in terms of doing. And they're being ministry then. They're doing ministry for you. They're helping you out. So don't get stuck in your box. Look at the walls and say, okay, what do I need to tear down? And it could be that the walls are being held up by your church itself, by the culture of your church. That's the next one I also want to talk about. There are some churches that have kind of a sense of who they are and what they are. And it's not that it's bad or good, it's just who they are. And I call it the culture. You have some churches that are very mission focused. I mean, that's kind of like their priority. They're sending groups all over the world all the time. That's who they are. Then you have another church that their Bible study, their teaching is the focus, and that's their priority. And you have other churches that have, you know, other things. It may be the children's ministry, it may be the youth ministry, it may be an adult ministry, it may be event driven in terms of, you know, they have this great conference that they do every year and everybody points and everything points to that. So understand the culture of your church and see what fits. There are some things that will not fit in different cultures and different mentalities of a church. And one of the things that you'll never find out about this until you're actually in the church. Because let's face it, when we're looking to change or get a position in another church, everybody puts their best foot forward. Not just you as the applicant, but the church. The church never never is upright and forthright about their problems, their issues, what you're going to get into once you sign the contract and step in the door. On day 2, you find out what your church is all about. And that's where you start learning what the walls are, what's acceptable, what have they always done. You know, we've always done it this way. And you know, some things of that you can make changes on, and some things you just have to be a little bit slower about making those changes. But never fear change. Never think about not doing something. There are ways to do it, but you have to think about it first and know your church that you're in, whether a volunteer or staff person, and also know yourself. Each of you have a personality that's different from someone else's, and what works effectively for me is who and part of what I am, you know, would be very awkward for someone else. And at the same time, in knowing myself and knowing maybe where I can push too fast and too hard, if I know myself and understand myself, understand the walls, I can come up with better ways of achieving and renovating my house. Vision. One of the things that every leader in children's ministry and every leader in the church needs to do is have a vision. You have a purpose. You have a, here's my mandate. Here's why we do what we do. And learn to communicate that to your staff, your volunteers. You know, answer the question, why are we here for? You know, what I tell folks all the time, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about the kids. And that's our vision. What can we do to lead children to Christ, to make them more effective Christian themselves, to make them effective Christian leaders? What can we do? And so that's kind of what drives our ministry and our programming and the events that we do. It's not about being another place to be. We're here for a purpose. And so that's important too. That's one of those walls that are there. So know your church's culture, and the staircase, if you will, going up to the second floor is your vision. And your staff needs to know your vision. And now I'm not saying that the vision of the church, the senior pastor, or anything like that is not to be done. But you need to have a vision for your ministry. And it needs to be yours. And you know, people are going to follow leadership. And one of the most important things, I appreciate the fact, if you're still watching this, that you're watching and listening, because I am not a real articulate speaker. I'm into relationships. I want the children to know me as their pastor, and I earn, if you will, the time that I spend with them, teaching them, because of the relationship I have built up, not because I know good jokes or I'm someone that everybody would just want to listen to. That's not who and what I am. Now, I'll be the first to admit that in knowing who I am, you have to understand that I use puppets and drama, and I'm very interactive, and I'll use anything that I can think of, PowerPoint games, timers. We'll create timers with the kids' pictures on them for countdowns. You know, if we can use it and it's not boring, and here's the way I do that. I get bored easy. My wife says I'm just a big kid. So if I'm bored, I know the kids are bored. And so I try to create something using magic, and there's some things called power puppets. And if you have questions about some of this stuff, drop me an email, and I'll be glad to share the resources with you. And I'll try to include a lot of those resources on the notes that go along with this video. But there's all different types of ways to be creative in what you do with children, whether it's in worship or in Sunday school or just in your times with them. And so, part of that is knowing who you are, what your capabilities are, and if you're not a creative person, find someone that is. And that way you can cast your vision, and the kids get a sense of what that is too. We'll end up with the final one being resources. And that has to do with, we've gone over some of the financial, the resources of volunteers, but also when you're in ministry, walk through your church and see what's laying around not being used. And I would challenge you to either use it or find another church that would love to have those resources. Now, they can be as simple as curriculum that you throw out that because of economics another church can't afford to buy, and pass that along. It can be like, I'm really into puppetry, and I remember going to one church that had literally a house that they had used for puppetry 10 years before, and the puppets were wrapped in plastic and hanging on the walls. And I looked at it and I went, wow, look at this, sitting, not being used. So walk around. I'm kind of a scavenger. I'll walk around, and if I see TVs not being used or whatever, they go right into my queue for being able to use for more Wii games for the fellowship time for the kids. Christmas time, listen, if you're cleaning your closets out, bring it down here. Let us throw it away if it's junk. And going through stuff, whatever I can get that's free saves me money to be able to buy something that I have to be able to buy. And so don't stand in your box. Don't just look in your closets and say, oh, this is all I have to work with. That's not. Be creative. Don't stand in the box. Stand on your box. So if you're taking this visual in terms of a house, you walk into your house, you examine it. You look at it and say, oh, okay, let's do this. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is say, okay, I don't know how to do this. There was one house that we renovated that had two 40-foot columns in the front that needed to be replaced. In order to replace them, there was 4 columns, but 2 of them were rotted. But in order to replace them, I had to jack up the whole top of the house and put scaffolding up. And now, I'm pretty good about renovation, but I was out of my league. I was sunk. My wife looked at me one time and she goes, well, why aren't you working on this stuff? And I looked at her and said, because I ain't got a clue as to what I've got to do. And so know who you are. If you're not a puppet person, then don't spend a lot of money on puppets. Your ministry is going to kind of be molded and followed after you and your core group. So if I go into the house and I look at the walls and look at it and say, okay, here's the wall, here's my wall of curriculum, here's my wall of finances, here's my wall of volunteers, and you look at all this and you see, okay, this is good, this needs to be changed, and go in there and renovate your house. Have a 5-year vision. I always say it takes 4 to 5 years to change the course of a ministry when you go into it. Then you start adding on to it. But you got to get it where it needs to be. And that's your job as a children's minister, as someone that's volunteering in children's ministry. You got to have a vision of where you're going, so you got some direction. Then all of this stuff ties into that. So if all of these things are important to finances, facility, volunteers, staffing, programming, church culture, vision, resources, all I'm saying in this time together is look at those see what you got, and then figure out how to go beyond that and use them in ways that you never used them before. Know yourself, know your church, know your children. And this is all common sense, but what's not common sense is that it's so close to us. We know it, so as soon as we hear about it, oh yeah, I know that. But the thing is, though, is that it's so close to us, we forget about it. And we let the tide roll us out. We go with the flow, and we should be standing firm, looking at these things and saying, okay, here's what I need to do. Here's what I need to do better or different than. And that's what I mean by standing in your box, and kind of like being, your box sets your priorities, it sets what you can do and everything else. Don't stand in the box. Don't let all of this stuff determine what your ministry will be. Get on top of that box, look out there, and open the walls of your box so that you can serve, and your children can serve, and your volunteers can serve, and you have ministry going. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to sharing some more different types of things. If you have any questions or further conversations, drop me a line, look me up on Facebook. All that stuff will be on in the notes. If I can help you in any way, please do so. I don't have all the answers, but what I do have, I'll be very glad to share with you. And I look forward to seeing you not only on future webinars, because I really can't see you, but at events that I speak at. Come up and shake my hand and give me your name, and let's have some coffee and talk, because we're all in the same thing. You know, one of the things is that the box that we're in is the box serving Jesus to model and mentor our kids, and that we can agree on. And with that, have a great time. Thank you.